Hey everybody, welcome to the Conscious Love Show. Whether you are single, you are in a relationship, or you're healing a broken heart, this show is here to inspire you, to remind you how beautiful, lovable, and amazing you truly are, and to give you the practical tools and insights to navigate from wherever you are right now to the loving relationship that you so deeply want to have. My name is Shane Kohler. I'm a certified transformational coach and trainer with over a decade experience helping people release their trauma and open their hearts to love. I've delivered seminars all over the world, coached thousands of people through my online platforms and programs, and every week I'm coming straight to you with the hottest insights and the best teachers around, bringing you powerful resources and profound conversations to heal your relationship with love, dating, and yourself. I'm so grateful you're here, and if it's your first time, welcome. You can count on me to always show up for you with my very best and a commitment to learn and grow myself so I can serve you to my maximum ability. Thanks so much for tuning into the show. I've got some awesome things planned for you today. So without further ado, let's dive in. All right. Hello again, everybody. Hello. Welcome back to the Conscious Love Show. Shane Kohler on with you. As always, pleasure to be here. Happy to be back this week and look forward to diving in with you. Today's episode is for anyone who has seen yourself be caught up in some kind of pattern, some kind of self-sabotage pattern, and that could mean different things to different people. So as you're listening today, I want you to kind of fill in the blanks with what is your pattern? What is the familiar thing that you keep going back to even though you know better? Even though you've spent years in therapy and you've read the books and you've listened to the podcasts and you've done the courses and you've named your childhood wounds and the origin of it and you know exactly how it plays out and exactly where it all comes from. And yet, when that critical moment comes for you to choose differently, your body is pulled back into that same familiar way of feeling, those same familiar relational dynamics, that same kind of relationship, that same person with a new face and a new name, but they're essentially the same person. That anxious, avoidant dance that you get pulled back into where you chase love or you pull away from love. That fight that you pick with your partner every time you get too close. That ick that you get for that secure person every time you might start to actually develop feelings for them. If you see yourself caught in some kind of recurring familiar pattern, and you know what it is, and you know what to do differently, but you keep going back to it anyway, this episode is for you. Today, I want to name exactly why we get stuck in patterns like that and exactly why we can't break them. I want to name why knowing better doesn't change anything, and actually, sometimes it can even make it worse. And I'm going to talk about that today. I want to touch on how the traditional guidance that has been given us around healing these patterns or changing these patterns often tends to reinforce the very patterns that we're trying to heal. And what I want to do in today's episode is take you from an understanding of the pattern to an embodied experience of your freedom from the pattern. Because that's really the only way we ever get free of it. We don't get free by thinking about it, by psychoanalyzing it, by reading books about it, by understanding it from every possible angle. We get free by working through the impressions that surface in the body around this pattern. The somatic, physical nervous system impressions that this pattern creates in our body that pull us back into the pattern. And today I want to talk about how we heal that. How we truly break that pattern on a somatic or a nervous system level. In today's episode, I'm going to share the same processes and practices that I teach my clients inside of my Inspired Love Journey. And I want to say, as we're heading into today's episode, if you resonate with what we're talking about, or if you if you know that you are caught in some kind of pattern and you're ready to do the work to break it, Inspired Love is the place where you and I can work very closely together on healing that. This is an 8-week journey. You'll work live with me twice a week for 8 weeks. We work very closely together, and I'm going to break down exactly what we do throughout the course of today's episode, because today is very much about me teaching you the exact tools that I use. But this is a community where we can name the pattern together. We can outline exactly what needs to be done to break the pattern. You'll be given guidance and support and encouragement and coaching every step of the way as you step into breaking this pattern. And over the course of 8 weeks, you'll experience an embodied shift in your nervous system so that you don't think differently about the pattern, although you probably will, but you feel differently about the pattern. It doesn't show up in your body the same way. You're not pulled back into it the way you used to be. So if that's interesting to you, if you're interested in working closely with me, if you know there's something in your love and relational life that you're ready to heal, Inspired Love is where we can do that. And I'm going to leave the link in the show notes below where you're listening to this episode. You can also just go to inspiredloveapproach.com. So if you're in the car right now, or you're at the gym or whatever, and you don't have a chance to go right now, just remember that domain, inspiredloveapproach.com. You can go there later tonight, take a look at the program. And if it's something you want to explore further, you can go ahead and book a call right on that page to learn more about the program, find out if it's the right thing for you. And we are enrolling right now for our May group. So we're enrolling a couple months out. And this is your chance to grab your spot for our upcoming May journey. So that said, I want to get into the main part of today. And first, what I want to touch on is kind of the old model, or the traditional model of psychoanalysis that originally started with Freud. He was one of the big ones who laid the groundwork for what we understand the ego to be. And most of what modern psychology has become is an evolution of Freudian psychology. And there are some really beautiful things about Freudian psychology that really helped us understand ourselves in profound ways. And there's one big pitfall in Freudian psychology where the whole thing kind of undermines itself. And so when I said earlier that so much of the guidance that we receive actually reinforces the patterns that we're trying to break, Freudian psychology, which again is the foundation of most of modern psychology, that's where a lot of this guidance comes from. And like I said, there's a major pitfall in this system that causes us to reinforce the very patterns that we're trying to break. And so let me just map out Freud's basic system. And I want to say what's great about it, and I want to name this pitfall that I'm talking about. So Freud's system, he was maybe one of the first people to really clearly identify or map the ego, which the ego is something I talk a lot about in the Inspired Love program and in the work we do. It's really about dismantling or shifting our relationship with the ego. So let me just say quickly what the ego is, and then I'll talk about Freud's system of how he defined or broke down the ego. The ego is basically the survival part of ourselves. It's not a villain. It's not the devil. It's not some horrible thing, but it does become very destructive when it becomes the primary acting force in our lives. And I'm just going to say, if you're having relational challenges on any level, they are 100% rooted in your ego. All of our relational challenges come from our egos. And so I want to make this really simple for today's podcast, because I don't want to confuse anybody, but let me just put it this way. When you were young, you experienced wounding. And I know I'm not saying anything revolutionary here, right? We all know this. When you were young, you experienced wounding. Probably in many ways from your parents, from your teachers, from your peers at school, from the social environment that you were raised in. Maybe there was abuse or neglect or some kind of overt trauma that happened. Maybe it was more subtle impressions that you picked up along the way. Subtle impressions that just made you feel a little unworthy. or a little shameful, or a little bit like you didn't belong, or a little bit like you just weren't quite good enough. And there are many ways that wounding can come about, and you've probably done enough work to understand all the different ways that wounding can come about. But when we're young, we experience wounding. And this wound is basically the engine of the ego. And so when we're young and we experience the various types of wounding, whatever that may be, from overt trauma to subtle impressions about our worthiness and who we are, when we experience that wounding, something emerges in our consciousness that wants to protect us from that wounding. And this is what Freud calls the superego. I'm going to get into Freud's system in a moment, but Freud calls it the superego. There's a system I do a lot of work with called IFS, internal family systems. And in internal family systems, these parts are called manager parts. But these are the parts that emerge from our core wounds, and they try to protect us. And so they say, if you do this, if you say this, if you behave this way, if you look good enough, if you behave properly, if you get the admiration and acceptance of others, if you have a successful career, if you have a successful marriage, if you have whatever metric it assigns that it believes will keep you safe, that it believes will make you worthy, that it will make you belong, whatever metric you're using for that, it says if you just play by these rules, if you just do these things, if you just prove yourself to be good enough and acceptable in the world, you'll be safe from this wounding, this feeling of shame or inferiority or doubt about your worthiness or any version of that. And so this is the basic philosophy, that there's a part of us that's wounded. And there's a part of us that's trying to protect against those wounds. And this combination of woundedness and protection is what makes up the ego. The ego is the system of woundedness and protection that shapes the way we relate with others, the way we even relate with ourselves. It shapes our motivations in life. It shapes our desires. It shapes our emotional world. It shapes basically every aspect of our life. This is essentially the ego. And as I said earlier, all of your relational problems are rooted in the ego. They're rooted in the core wounds that you have from when you were younger, which are all relational. Again, whether it's from your parents or your peers or your teachers, it's all relational stuff. And then the ways that you try to protect against that wounding. And this is the source of every relational problem that you or I or anybody has ever had. And so in Freud's model, and this is where the big trap is, Freud mapped out the ego in three parts. He said there is the ego, the superego, and the id. And basically the superego is the forward-facing part of us. So when you show up to work, when you show up to a job interview, when you show up in your relationship, when you show up with your family, when you show up in any domain of your life where you're kind of forming yourself into a certain persona of who you're supposed to be in that environment, that is the superego at work. So the superego is the collection of internalized impressions that says, this is who I have to be in the world. The id, you could think of it like basic instinct. This is like raw sex drive, raw pursuit of desire. This is like the dopamine system in the brain. It's like when you get stuck scrolling on social media, right? Like you're just going down that scrolling wormhole. That's the id. It's like the basic instinct, the basic drives of the body. It's the basic dopamine system in the brain, the basic sex drive, the basic pursuit of desire. The id is the part of us that wants to kind of live like an animal. So we don't want to have to be responsible. We don't want to have to shape ourselves into the version that society expects us to be. We don't want to have to work and carry the weight of like managing a responsible life. We want to live on instinct. That's the id. And we all have both these parts. This was the brilliant part of Freud's system, is he gave language to things that live in all of us but hadn't really been defined up until that point. And we all have the superego and we all have the id. And what he called the ego, so in his three-part system, there was the superego, the id, and the ego. What he called the ego was basically the self that's caught between these two parts. And in Freud's system, he basically said that our job in life, our role in life, is to balance ourselves somewhere between the id and the superego and create a balanced sense of self. Like, I guess he would have called it like a healthy, regulated ego, that we somehow resolved the conflict between the superego and the id, if that makes sense. So we resolved the conflict between our basic animal self and the social adjustable self. And we somehow merged these two into an authentic, regulated, healthy self. Now, that's not 100% wrong, because life does kind of feel that way sometimes, right? Like, and so he was mapping something that I think is very real and we all feel. We're all trying to find this balance between these two opposing parts of ourselves. But what he maybe mistakenly did when he developed the system, or maybe it wasn't even what he did, but what a lot of us end up doing when we try to do that, when we try to find that healthy, regulated ego, is there's really nowhere where that healthy, regulated ego would end and the superego would begin. And so all our attempts to create this well-crafted, balanced sense of self ultimately becomes more of the superego trying to fit us into the constraints of who we believe we're supposed to be. And this is why this system fundamentally doesn't work, and it becomes impossible. And this is why you can't break the pattern that you're stuck in. Because all of the guidance, all of the information, all of the studying and all of the researching and all of the learning and all of the analyzing and all of the reflecting and all of the things we do to try to heal the pattern just become part of that superego. It becomes another part of the internal judge that is constantly critiquing ourselves and telling us we need to change and we need to be different and we need to be better. So the very process of trying to balance the id and the superego, the very process of trying to create this regulated, balanced sense of self just becomes more of the internal critic and the internal judge reflecting to us that we're still not good enough. We're still not healed. That is the pitfall in Freud's system. And that's why it's often so difficult for us to break these patterns. Now, Jung brought something revolutionary. So Carl Jung was another famous psychologist back in the time of Freud. And he brought something revolutionary to the table. The idea that you are not your ego. And this is essentially the foundation of my work, and everything I do is more in Jung's line of thinking, where it's not about making a better ego. It's about creating distance between yourself and the ego. And so Jung proposed that there is a center of consciousness, a self, that exists outside of the personality and outside of the triggers and outside of the trauma. There's actually a whole self that is fundamentally distinct from the ego. So we could say when you were born, it was yourself that was born into this world. And by the way, Jung did not invent this idea. This is a millennia old mystical idea that has been, really foundational to every religion around the world, right? In yoga or in Hindu philosophy, they refer to the Atman, which is essentially the self that Jung was talking about. In Christianity or in Judaism, we have the soul, right? Like there's almost every religion has this idea that there is a you that's bigger than your personality, bigger than your identity, bigger than your survival mechanisms, that there's something that is fundamentally you that exists deeper than all of that. And it's interesting, and this is I think the trap in modern psychology and why so much of the therapy world becomes a prison in and of itself, is because we try to solve the mind with the mind. We try to solve the ego with the ego. And there's like that Einstein quote that some of you have probably heard, but Einstein said, you can't solve a problem with the same consciousness that created the problem, right? If the ego is the problem, you can't solve the ego with the ego, right? If the ego is the thing that is creating the pattern, if the ego is the thing that is creating the relational challenges that you're facing, you can't fix the ego with the ego. And this is where I think it becomes a big trap, especially in the therapy world, is the more you analyze the ego, the more you start to dwell in the patterns of it, the more you start to go into your past and, oh, well, when I was 5 years old, I experienced this and I am this way for this reason. And like a lot of times what we do is it's like we're an attorney building a case against ourselves. We collect all the evidence and we find every little shred of evidence throughout our past that says, I am this way because of all the things I've been through. And we build a case against ourselves that the pattern becomes so real that we can't break it. This is why you know everything about the pattern. You know exactly how it shows up and when it shows up. You know exactly where it came from and the origin and the things that happened in your childhood. You know all of this. And what you've done is you've made it so real that now you're stuck inside of it. It's like, if you are the pattern, how could you ever break it? It's what you are. And this is the trap that a lot of the modern psychological world is stuck in, because from a scientific standpoint, we are reluctant to deal with anything spiritual or metaphysical. And Jung's self is essentially a spiritual or metaphysical thing. It's something that existed before the human. It's something that incarnated into the human experience. And the ego actually developed inside of the consciousness that is self. So it's not you existing inside of your ego, it's your ego existing inside of you. Now, the reason the scientific world doesn't want to deal with that is because it's not quantifiable or measurable. And so we can't know if it's real in a literal sense, the way I can know that this microphone I'm speaking into right now is real. But I guess there's a paradox here, because I feel like the most unscientific thing is to stay rigidly tied to a structure that doesn't work just because that structure is measurable, right? It's like, it's like that's fundamentally unscientific, because then it becomes like when the experimentation and the exploration ends, now it's more like a religion. But anyway, I'm going to go on a rant about that if I don't stay on track here. The point is that Jung brought something revolutionary to the table, because if I am not the ego, if there is something outside of my ego, that gives me a point of access from which I can actually resolve the ego. But if the ego is the totality of who and what I am, I'm fucked. There's nowhere to go. And again, this is why we stay stuck inside the pattern. And you don't break a pattern by improving the ego, which is what the superego is always trying to do. Trying to make your ego better, more perfect, more acceptable, more of what people want. And it just reinforces itself. You break the pattern by disidentifying from the ego altogether and moving your center of gravity into the self. And again, this is what mystics and spiritual communities have been doing for eons. In meditation techniques, there's a very known experience called the observer experience. And for anyone who studied meditation, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. This is where you step back as an impartial observer of your experience. So let's say maybe you're dating someone and you're sitting around waiting on a text or a call from them and you haven't heard from them in a few days, and you're ruminating about where are they and why haven't I heard from them, and are they going to ghost me? Are they losing interest? Did I do something wrong? Did I say something? Should I text them? Should I not? I don't want to look desperate. And you find yourself caught in this rumination. Like if we look at what's happening there, there's a war going on between your id and your superego, right? The superego, who you should be, I don't want to look desperate. I don't want to push them away. I don't want to do something wrong. I want to do this right. I want to be acceptable. I want to get the approval of the person. I want to make them like me, right? So that's all the superego. Who do I have to be in this environment to secure love and belonging for myself? And then there's the id, the basic instinct of, I need their attention. I need their validation. I need the connection. I need them to want me. I need to be liked. I need to be accepted. So there's the superego and the id, and there's kind of that war going on between the two. And then in Freud's system, he would say, well, your ego is the one who has to balance that. But as I just illustrated, the more you try to balance that, the more you're just fueling the superego, the inner critic, the perfectionist, the one who has to get it right. And so when we use this observer tool, what we're essentially doing is we are stepping back out of the ego and into the self. So we could say all of your experiences are contained by a consciousness that is an impartial observer of the experience. Often the way this is spoken about is if you have thoughts, right? If you put yourself back in that rumination scenario I just talked about. Well, if you have thoughts, there is the thought, and then there is something that hears the thought. Well, if you can hear the thought, you must not be the thought, right? Like you're listening to this podcast right now. If you can hear me, you must not be me. Because you are over there and I'm over here, and you're hearing my voice come through the speaker, and there's a clear separation between who you are and who I am. Well, it's the same thing with your own thoughts. If you can hear your own thoughts, you must not be the thought. So the thought is coming from the ego. The ego is the thinking mind. The thought is coming from the ego. The self is that which hears the thought. Now the ego feeds itself. So one thought leads to another thought, leads to another thought, leads to another thought. And there's a loop in the way that the thoughts interact with the nervous system. And so what happens is generally it starts with some kind of feeling, some kind of threat. And so maybe you're going about your day and then suddenly the thought crosses your mind that, oh, I haven't heard from them all day. Where are they? And immediately you feel that threat in your body. And then your mind, your ego mind, your thinking mind responds with another thought. Should I text them? And then that increases the threat in your body, because then it's like, well, if I text them, what's going to happen? And then that leads to another thought. Well, I don't want to text them and make myself look silly or make myself look desperate. Maybe I should just wait. And then that leads to another threat in your body. Well, how long am I going to be waiting? And you see how this loop goes. So the thoughts trigger the nervous system, trigger the thoughts, trigger the nervous system. And now what you have is your ego trying to emotionally and even often physically control the experience to protect yourself from pain. And if we go all the way back to where I started today's conversation, I said when you're young, you experience some type of relational wounding, and your ego emerges to try to protect yourself from that. And underneath whatever self-sabotage pattern you have, this is the pattern. This is the core pattern. You're trying to protect yourself from pain. When you were young, you experienced a threat in your nervous system, and you have become hyper attuned. You have developed a threat detector that is constantly scanning for threats. And now your mind is constantly on overdrive as you scan the world for threats and try to protect against them. And this is the contained system of the ego. Now, the self operates outside of that system. So we could say when you were born, you were born as self. Again, the Atman, the soul, whatever you want to call it, whatever framework you want to put it inside of, but there is this authentic self energy, this essence of who we are that's distinct from the ego. And you weren't born as an ego, you were born as a self. It's only throughout your life as you experienced threat, and some people theorize that this begins from the moment of birth, because birth is a traumatic event, right? So sometimes the moment we are birthed and we experience that separation from our mother, like people theorize that the ego starts right then. So it could theoretically have begun from the moment of your birth. But regardless of that, there is still a consciousness that was there to even experience the birth. And so there's the consciousness that is experiencing the birth, and then there's the part of you that says, oh my God, this is terrifying, and then it starts trying to protect against fear. So the practice of the observer is, if you put yourself into that rumination scenario I was talking about, or put yourself into your own pattern, whatever that pattern is, stepping into the observer takes you outside of that pattern and allows you to see it as a kind of dispassionate third party. So let's say you were ruminating and you caught yourself ruminating. You might take a step back. You might sit down quietly for a moment, take some deep breaths, and begin to neutrally observe your own thoughts. And as you can neutrally observe your own thoughts, think about it like you're not having a conversation with someone, you're standing nearby watching a conversation between two people. Or maybe even just standing nearby watching someone talk to themselves, right? But you're not involved in the conversation. You're just kind of watching it happen. In that moment, what you are doing is you are stepping into the energy of self. You are disidentifying, disassociating with that ego. You are, in a somatic sense, not a theoretical sense, but in a way that feels alive inside your body, you are experiencing a part of yourself that exists independent from the ego. This is the first step to breaking any pattern. Because you're no longer trying to fix the pattern. You're no longer criticizing or judging the pattern. You're simply giving it space to exist without identifying it as who you are. Now, this is where I would introduce the nervous system work. And so I mentioned the Inspired Love program earlier, and I just want to touch on a few things here. Because what we do in the program, I'll cover some of what I just covered with you, but you already know that, you just heard it. What we do in the program is actually guide you in the specific tools, techniques, and actions you need to take to rewire your nervous system. If you remember what I said earlier about the way that the thought triggers the nervous system, and then the nervous system triggers another thought, and the thought triggers the threat detector in the nervous system, and then you get caught in this endless loop. My body is triggered, my survival instinct is triggered, and that gets me thinking and trying to control. And that triggers more threat, and the more I try to control, the more threatened I feel, and the more threatened I feel, the more I try to control. This is the familiar pattern. This is the pattern. And it may have various ways, whether you're addicted to chaos and you always chase the unavailable, unpredictable people, whether you get the ick every time you get close to somebody, whether you're constantly caught up in an anxious, avoidant dance, whether you have unrealistic standards that nobody is ever good enough, so you find excuses to pull away from someone before you even get to know them. All of these are different versions of the pattern. But the pattern is you have strategic structures of control that prevent you from ever feeling threatened, or try to prevent you from ever feeling threatened. You don't actually prevent it. You still feel threatened all the time. But that is the pattern. And there was something I learned about the nervous system that revolutionized the way I look at everything. And it was this. It was that you can only have the life or the love or the relationship that your nervous system feels safe holding. So all of the different self-sabotage patterns I just named, whether it's the ick or the chaos addiction or the attraction to unavailable people or the anxious avoidant dance, all of the different self-sabotage patterns I've named are things that your nervous system feels safe holding. And that part sounds counterintuitive, and I get why it sounds counterintuitive. Because you're like, I don't feel safe. I feel like I'm constantly under threat. And that's the biggest paradox of the whole thing, is the ego fails miserably at its job. Right? This is something we have to understand about the ego. Like, the ego is a liar, because the ego tells you, if you listen to me, you'll stay safe. And yet you constantly feel under threat. So the ego is terrible at its job. It promises safety, but it can't deliver it. And so we stay caught in never-ending cycles of dis-ease, being not at ease, which often leads to real dis-ease. But we stay trapped in these perpetual cycles because the ego cannot deliver on its promise. But there's that old saying, it says, the devil I know is better than the devil I don't. And that's kind of what it is. When I say our nervous system feels safe holding this pattern, it's not because it feels good or feels at ease in this pattern. It's because the pattern is a familiar chaos that the nervous system has adapted to. I find it fascinating, like when I work with people and we work on their origin stories. And one of the ways I do that is I work with the wounded parent archetypes. And so we look at the various archetypes of trauma that might have shaped your childhood. And when you identify which archetypes were resonant for you and you kind of identify the origin of your chaos, we map that onto your adult relationships. And we often see that you've done a very crafty job of reconstructing your childhood environment inside your adult relationships. It's fascinating. It really, I mean, it's tragic because it's painful and it's never ending, but it's fascinating to see how perfectly we do this. Whatever pattern you've developed is literally just a strategy that you've been using to recreate the emotional environment that you experienced as a child. And while it doesn't feel safe, while you don't feel at ease inside of it, it's a predictable chaos that you've adapted to. And the real problem is that the love you want to experience doesn't feel safe to the nervous system. And this is the paradox, is that love is probably safer than the love you do experience, but it doesn't feel safer because it's unfamiliar. And so our body gravitates towards the chaos because the peace feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar equals unsafe. And so what we have to do is we have to learn to treat our nervous system like a muscle. This is why so many of my clients come to me. I've heard this 100 times. I'm not even kidding. And I'm not bragging when I say this. It's just the reality. But so many of my clients have come to me and they've said, I've spent years in therapy and I haven't gotten as much as I got in 8 weeks with you. And I want to be clear, like, I'm not special. It's not magic. It's just a method that I've learned that works really, really well. And it's exactly what I'm talking about here, where we treat our nervous system like a muscle. Because sitting around and reflecting on our past doesn't matter as much as we think it does. We don't have to know exactly where our wounds came from. And it can be enlightening to do so, like what I was talking about with the archetypes earlier, and when we can see what our childhood environment was like and we can see how we've created that in our adult life, that can be very enlightening, and it can give us a really strong distinction of what that pattern is so we can become more aware of it. I'm not saying it's not helpful at all, but a lot of the clients who have come to me, they've spent years just ruminating on their pattern and analyzing their pattern, and all they've done was made it more real, but they're still trapped inside of it. And the thing is you don't necessarily need to know about your past or where this came from. What you need to do is understand how it shows up in your body right now. That's the key to freedom. You know, it's funny, they do studies on memory, and what they've come up with is that our memories aren't even real. Our memories are just stories we tell ourselves. It didn't even happen the way we remember it happened. And that's really interesting. Like you can have 4 people who experience the same event, and when you ask them to recount the event, they'll tell you 4 different stories. So our memories aren't even real the way we think they are. Our memories are just a story we tell ourselves in the present moment to make sense of what's happening right now. But life is actually existing now. It's not what happened in the past, it's what is alive right now. Sometimes I'll have a client come to me and they're really caught up on something that happened to them in childhood, or sometimes even the idea that something happened, but they don't know what it is. They say, I know something happened and that's why I am the way I am, but I don't know what it is. And I say, oh, well, that's great news, because you don't need to know what it is. All you need to do is get familiar with how it's living inside of you right now. And so you work the nervous system like a muscle. And so if you go to the gym and you pick up a 20-pound weight and you lift that weight every day for a week, the next week you can go back and pick up a 25-pound weight. And if you lift that weight every day for a week, next week you can go back, you can pick up a 30-pound weight. Right? So we can work our nervous system in the same way. And so what I do with clients inside the Inspired Love program is it's very simple. First, we identify what are the boundaries of what your nervous system can currently contain. And then we start to identify specific actions you can take in your life to press up against those boundaries. Now, this is the magic part, because if you try to do this alone, like you could make a list of 10 things that you're afraid to do. And hey, I'll suggest that you do this, right? Make a list of 10 things you're afraid to do and go out and start doing them. And if you do them and you push through that, you will increase the capacity of what your nervous system can hold. So walk up to that hot guy in the coffee shop and give him your phone number. Right? Like set up a dating app profile and start engaging with people. When you're with that secure person who feels boring and you want to run, stay. Right? Like whatever you're afraid to do, do it. And as you do it, you start increasing the capacity of what your nervous system can hold. It's just like picking up a larger weight. But this is the magic of the program and the magic of working in community. And this is why you can try that exercise right now and let me know how it goes. Maybe it works out great for you. But what people usually run into is they make the list. They say, I'm going to do it. And then they say, oh, I'm going to do it tomorrow. Or maybe they say, you know what, there's this guy at my coffee shop. I see him every morning. I'm going to go up to him and give him my phone number. I'm just going to do it. And then she tries to do it. And she physically can't do it. Because the nervous system response in the moment does not literally allow her the space to take that action. And then she might internalize that failure. She might start to make up more stories. See, it's never going to happen for me because I can't even go up and say hi and give out my phone number. What's wrong with me? Why am I like this? Why am I so afraid? Oh, it must be my trauma. And now she's back in the story. Now she's back in the trap. See, this is the magic of the work we do. Is when you take those steps, you take them in the support of a loving community. And sometimes people come back and they say, I did it and this is what happened. Sometimes people come back and they say, I just couldn't do it. And we talk about that, what that was like. Sometimes people say, oh my God, I did it and my whole body is shaking and I don't even know what to do right now. But whatever happens, we are with you in this process. So we're helping you identify exactly what actions you can take. We're coaching you on any resistance that shows up. We're working with you as you take that step. We're reflecting on what happens afterwards. And the most important part is we're teaching you the regulation techniques that allow you to move through that resistance when it comes up. Because here's another thing that happens. If you don't know how to regulate, what's often going to happen when you don't know how to regulate is you're going to take a few steps in that direction and you'll kind of force yourself through it. So maybe you give the phone number out. Maybe, you force yourself through it and you take 1 or 2 or 3 steps. But if you're not regulating through this process, you build up so much internal resistance that you just stop altogether. This is maybe even the bigger trap. You see how subtle that is? You actually do the things, you start stepping in the right direction until the internal resistance becomes so big that you collapse. And this part's really insidious because what we tell ourselves is, I did it and it didn't work. That's the equivalent of like saying, I'm going to hike to the top of Mount Everest and I took a flight to the airport and then turned around and came home. Right? It's like I didn't even start up the mountain, but I took one step and it didn't work. That happens with a lot of people. Because it's seductive enough to make you think that you did it. And then we collapse back into the pattern. And so what's needed is consistent forward progress. We need to literally every day, or at least most days, expand the capacity for what our nervous system can hold in some way. Sometimes we do this by having really honest, vulnerable conversations with someone we're dating, by expressing our need or expressing our desire or expressing our vision or what we want. Sometimes we do this by walking away from a connection that can't meet our needs. A lot of us are caught in that pattern. The pattern of we keep going back to a relationship that's not working because being in that relationship feels safer than not being in it, even when that relationship has already proven that it can't really meet us where we want to be met. So we need to consistently increase the capacity for what we can hold. Every day, or at least most days. And we need to regulate ourselves every step of the way so we learn to feel safe at each new level. I've had so many women come to me and be like, I meet great guys all the time, guys that are commitment ready, guys that are interested, and they're just boring. They don't spark anything in me. I'm not attracted to them. I hear it all the time. I'm not physically attracted. And sometimes I'll even ask these women, I'll say, well, if you saw this person on a magazine, would you think they were attractive? Like if you saw them on a television show, would you think they were attractive? And she's like, yeah, they're a good-looking guy. I'm like, okay. So then the attraction isn't about how they look, The attraction is about the way your nervous system responds to them. It's not that this person isn't attractive, it's that this person doesn't feel familiar. And that kills the spark. And it's interesting because a lot of times when I find a woman in this situation, she describes the experience as boring. But what's actually happening is she's just activated in a completely different way. So she's creating the same anxiety that she feels with the avoidant guy. She's just creating it around her fear of this relationship not being the one. What if I'm never attracted to him? What if I have to settle? What if I'm bored for the rest of my life? And she creates an incredible amount of anxiety in her system that actually mirrors the anxiety that she feels when she's with somebody who's avoidant. Isn't that fascinating? Because again, going back to what I said earlier, the ego has one goal: to recreate the emotional experience that feels familiar based on what I learned in childhood. So if she's with an avoidant guy, he creates that experience for her. If she's with a secure guy, she has to create it for herself by constantly worrying and ruminating about how she's not attracted to him. But when I work with a woman inside of this type of situation, and I help her regulate her system, and I'll say, give it 3 months. Give it 3 months and let's just stay with this. And I'm going to work with you on how to regulate your system when the anxiety shows up. I'm going to work with you on the kinds of conversations that build intimacy. I'm going to work with you on the kinds of conversations that might spark more attraction, or the kinds of things you could invite him into that might help you recognize the things that you are attracted to about him. I'm going to ask you to be patient with the icks when they show up and just breathe through those icks. And it's fascinating that when she stays with it, almost all the time, maybe slowly at first, and then it builds, and then it becomes overwhelming, she ends up being incredibly attracted to this guy. And the reason was that she just had to let her nervous system learn to feel safe inside of this relationship. It was never that he wasn't attractive. It was that she didn't feel safe because he felt unfamiliar. And I want to say that this is the kind of work that, for the most part, I don't really think you can do on your own. You can do it on your own to a degree. Like, there are definitely steps you can take on your own. And in between sessions, all of the ladies in the program, they're out there doing it on their own. And then they're coming back and we check in about it, right? But the reason I say you can't do it on your own necessarily is because, let me put it this way. Our blueprints about love and belonging are shaped in relationship, and they're also healed in relationship. It's in working with each other that we can create a new blueprint to replace the old one. And in fact, when people insist on remaining in isolation, I want to do this on my own. I don't want to work with a coach. I don't want to work with a group. When we insist on doing this in isolation, that's usually another ego strategy trying to keep us in the familiar pattern, because what feels familiar to our nervous system? Isolation. Exposing my patterns to a coach being seen in front of a group, being challenged into things that are uncomfortable, that's unfamiliar. That's scary. If I remain in isolation, I keep the whole game on my terms. I'm in absolute control of the experience. I can choose exactly how far I'm willing to go and how far I'm willing to go. If I say I'm going to do something and I don't do it, I don't have to answer for it. I can just pretend like it never happened. And if you find yourself stuck in a pattern, I'll bet you relate to everything I just said. Because these are the very things that keep you stuck in patterns. And look, I'm not here to sell you a program. I'm here to serve you. And so, if you are okay with where things are, you don't feel the need to really address some kind of pattern that you're living in, awesome. The program's not for you. But if you feel stuck in a pattern and you're looking for a way out of it, this is your way. It's right here in front of you. The typical result is that in 8 weeks, people experience a profound shift. Everybody's journey is different. Some people spend a little more time. We have an extended integration program for anyone who wants to spend a little more time in the work. But the typical result is that people experience a profound shift in 8 weeks. They become more confident. They become more secure. They become more available. They typically start to attract different kinds of experiences and different types of men or relationships into their life. They typically start to feel a different essence showing up inside of them when they're dating or when they're interacting with people. They tend to experience a lessening of the attachment they have to certain outcomes. A willingness to let things happen the way they want to happen and trust that things are working out for them. They tend to experience a bit more power within themselves, a bit more like confidence and security and a sense of agency and power, like they're able to direct the way things work out in their lives rather than feeling like they're helplessly at the mercy of the conditions or who chooses them or who doesn't. And this is what the work is all about. And I'm not hiding anything. I told you exactly how it all works today. I broke it down for you step by step. So the question is this: are you ready to take yourself seriously enough to break this pattern? Are you ready to claim that for yourself? And if you're not, that's okay. Keep listening to the podcast. I'll keep bringing you insights every week. I'm here for it. I'm not going anywhere. There's no rush. You're not going anywhere, right? But if you've gotten to a point where you're like, something needs to change. You know, if it's like, if New Year's Day 2027 rolls around and I'm still living inside this pattern, I'm going to hate myself for it. That's how you know it's time to take this seriously. And it's time to do something about it. And I want you to know that this pattern is not who you are. It's something that you have taken on to attempt to protect yourself. And it's become so all-consuming that at a certain point you don't know where you end and the pattern begins. And that's what this program is designed to do. It's designed to restore that boundary. So again, I want to say, if you're interested, if you'd like to learn more, if you want to book a call with us to learn about the program and really find out if this is the right thing for you, you can go to inspiredloveapproach.com. There's a lot of information right there. You can see the trajectory of the program, the curriculum, everything that's included in it. You can just get kind of a bird's eye view of what the program is on that page. And then if you want, you can book a call right there to speak with someone to learn more about the program and exactly how we'll work with you inside of it. And then if it feels right, we'd love to have you. Right now we are enrolling for May. So we're enrolling a couple months out right now, but we have space available for May. And I would invite you to take that step, jump in with us, and you'll be very grateful you did. So I want to thank you for being with me in today's episode. Lots of love and blessings, everybody. Again, you can learn about the Inspired Love program at inspiredloveapproach.com. And I'm going to leave that link in the show notes right below wherever you're listening to this episode. Aside from that, hope you enjoyed today. Lots of love and blessings. I'll be back with you next week. Take care until then. Bye. Thanks again for checking out the show. Please subscribe on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on the most. And I would love it so much if you leave a review and tell people what you think of us. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at The Living Relationship to connect more closely. And I'm grateful to be supporting you on your journey to love.